Hey, Alli, do you ever have clients say, I'm too old for that?
Of course I do. And they need to listen to this amazing guest that we have, an expert in functional aging, Dr. Dan Ritchie. Let's jump in. Welcome to the Girls Talk Healthy Aging podcast, where we dive deep into pressing health and fitness issues facing aging women. I'm Alli Kerr.
And I'm Shawna Kaminski. And together we'll bring candid conversations, expert advice, and personal stories that will inspire and empower you on your own wellness journey. Hey, we've got an exciting podcast today with Dan Ritchie. Now, Dan completed his PhD in kinesiology with a minor in gerontology at Purdue University. He owned Miracles Fitness in West Lafayette, Indiana, training over 2,000 clients. In 2014, he was awarded PFP Trainer of the Year, and shortly thereafter, he co-founded the Functional Aging Institute. Now, FAI is at the forefront of developing innovative, effective, evidence-based training for older clients and has 3 high-quality certifications to help fitness professionals serve the adult 55 plus population. Now, statistics show that one Fit Pro affects 1,000 lives over the course of their career. So Dan and FAI's mission is to certify 10,000 Fit Pros, which would in turn impact 10 million lives. Dan is a longtime friend, family man with wife Jen and 5 children. Welcome to the podcast, Dan.
Thanks so much for having me. This is going to be a blast.
Now, my first question that I don't think I've ever asked you over time is why, as a young person, were you interested in working with the older population?
Well, honestly, I wasn't. I started out planning to work with athletes. In fact, after I got my undergrad degree, I spent a full year training Division I athletes and quickly realized I don't think I want to do this for the rest of my life because the hours are terrible, the pay is terrible, the athletes are not very enjoyable clients. And so I moved on to get my master's degree at that point, thinking, well, maybe I'll go into academia and get my PhD and teach. And I started personal training at a large health club I guess I was about 24, 25. And guess who kept coming to me as clients? People in their 40s, 50s, 60s, all these baby boomers in their 40s and 50s, and then seniors. And I remember 72-year-old Don came to me and his fitness goal was to tie his own shoes. And I thought, what a novel fitness goal that I never thought I'd be training anyone for. And 4 weeks later, when Don came in and he's like, hey, Dan, check out my new shoes. Still to this day, that's the weirdest thing a 72-year-old guy's ever asked me, right? Like, heck, and I looked down at his shoes and they're brand new Nikes laced up. He'd been wearing Velcro shoes because he couldn't tie his own shoes. And by the time I looked up, he had tears in his eyes. Now I have tears in my eyes. And I'm like, this is what I want to do, right? I want to help people. Don had 4 knee replacements. And so he couldn't reach his own feet anymore because of all the damage. And so in just 4 weeks, I was able to give him back a whole new lease on life. And from there forward, I was like, I want to get my PhD at Purdue. I want to train people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s to be able to do things. Because Don wanted to play golf. And he's like, I can't even tie my own shoes. I feel like such an old, teetering, tottering guy on the golf course. So that's really how it happened. I didn't expect it to go that way, but it's kind of the clientele I fell in love with.
Yeah, it's kind of often how life goes is that you just have to keep putting one foot in front of the other and you just never really know where it leads to. But good for you for finding that passion so early. So given that we're the Girls Talk Healthy Aging, we are, kind of women focused. Tell us about your experience working in particular with women and aging women.
Well, I would say if you're going to work in fitness, personal training, that realm, you're going to wind up working with women. Women are about 2/3 to 3/4 of the personal training clients. I think that's partly due to the fact that women care more about their health than men. But I think it's also that they're willing to ask for help more than men. So even men that care about their health are like, oh, I can figure it out on my own. I don't need a trainer. And so I think women are more likely to seek out expertise, seek out an expert, look for help, admit they need help, not have this ego that says, oh, I can figure this out on my own. I don't need someone to tell me how to do it. And so early on, when we opened our fitness studio in 2007, I mean, we realized we were going to be serving and training a lot of women. We needed to cater our business towards women, design it for women. And then if we get some men, great. That's just sort of a side bonus. But let's build the whole business focused on the 50 plus female. Realize that she's got a ton of goals, right? I mean, you turn 50 and it's like, oh my gosh, I got 40, 45 years, maybe 50 years ahead of me. And so that then leads to, oh my goodness, I have so many fitness goals I need to have, because if I want to keep doing stuff in my 70s, 80s, and 90s, I got to start getting serious about my strength and my overall fitness. And, so that was really kind of our focus. We realized that's going to be the dominant consumer. And here in 2023, the most dominant consumer in the fitness world is the baby boomer female, right? That woman who's 58 to 75 is really driving the fitness market.
You were so ahead of the curve when you started this, because, side note, Dan and Alli and I, we met in a business mastermind. And I remember our leader saying, Dan, pick a different demographic. Thank goodness you didn't listen, hey?
Yeah, I mean, I even remember him saying, when we launched the Functional Aging Institute, he said, you're so far ahead of the curve, the industry isn't seeing the opportunity that's coming and is growing. And of course, you run into fitness owners, they're like, oh, well, yeah, I train people in their 50s. I'm like, yeah, that's mostly on accident. It's not because you designed your business that way. It's because they're coming in because they need help. I said, could you imagine what it would look like if you designed your business for women in their 50s and 60s who, oh, by the way, have the biggest need, have the most money, have the most free time, instead of building your whole fitness business focused on young people. So, and now I think post-COVID, it's almost like we flipped a switch. I mean, we're seeing it more and more and more, because who's returning saying, I got to do something about my health? It's people in their 60s. And so now fitness places are really attuned to the fact that they've got to serve them, have programs for them. I think people are realizing, well, 60 is not old, right? I mean, it's really not. If you think about you're going to live to 90, it's like, I got 30 more years. And we keep kind of shifting what is old in North America, right? I mean, Canada has already got like 1 out of 3 people over 65. I mean, it's sort of staggering how fast the 65 demographic's growing. At some point we have to say, but even 65 isn't old if you don't believe it is, right? So a lot of it, I think, is mindset, and you guys are going to do a tremendous job with this podcast, kind of shifting the mindset about what does it look like to be 50, 60, 70 years old.
And what are realistic goals? What's possible? So what would be the difference, between training someone in their 30s and someone in their 50s or 60s or 70s?
I think the difference really is very much based on goals and what people want to do. It's not that, oh, you're 30, I'm going to train you like you're 30, or you're 50, I'm going to train you like you're 50. I need to train you for the things you need to do to enjoy life, right? And that's different for everyone, right? One 50-year-old might say, well, I want to water ski and downhill ski and hike and, do these really dynamic activities. And the 30-year-old might say, I just want to lose 10 pounds and feel better and, be able to take a run around the block with my kids, and doesn't have even the same fitness level goals as the 50-year-old. And so I think we have to approach it from what does the client want. Now, as they get into their 60s and 70s, we have to be a little bit smarter, I think, about how we take care of people's joints, right? Like, I'm not going to train a 70-year-old like they're 30 any more than I'm going to train a 30-year-old like they're 70, right? It just doesn't make sense. The need for recovery, a 70-year-old probably needs more balance training and a little bit more speed and reaction time training. We start to lose some of our quickness and our speed and the way we react. And we start to notice at the age of 70, people start to have falls, and they start to fall and have injuries and things like, oh, the parking block tripped me. And I'm like, the parking block hasn't moved since you were 25. It didn't trip you. You just didn't step over it quick enough. or you didn't react to it, right? We lose our balance in our 30s. If we wind up falling, it's an if, we probably recover. We're probably quick enough to recover. But if we wind up falling, we don't get hurt. All of a sudden in our 70s, we don't fall quite as agile. Our fall doesn't look as good. And all of a sudden, how'd you wind up breaking your wrist or bashing your face or, that sort of thing? And so as people get into their 70s, we really start paying attention to balance and agility.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, things like bone density and, joint stability and, brittle cartilage and all those things kind of come into play. And
Yep.
so what would be your best advice for, because some of our listeners are, listening and realizing, hey, I haven't really done much in the way of athletics all my life. Like, how do I even get started? What would be your best advice to someone just getting into fitness later in life?
Well, the first thing I always say is it's never too late. So when somebody's listening thinking, oh, I'm 70 and I've waited too long. Okay, let's get started today, right? Like we can't not get started because, I regret I didn't start 5 years ago, right? Sure, it's always better to have started 10 years ago, but you got to get started today. So I always say start with something. Depending on your age, especially as you get over the age of 60, I really emphasize people doing lower body functional strength and power. I think the mistake, we neglect speed and power elements. So things like a basic squat or a chair stand or certain things where you're basically lifting your body weight, we have to do those with speed as well. So if you're going to do 10 squats, also do 10 jump squats, also do 10 jumping jacks, right? So add something that has a speed element, because that is really going to impact your function as you age, right? If you think about a 90-year-old, typically 90-year-olds don't get out of the chair really fast, right? They don't hop, they don't jump, they don't have what we call a spring in their step anymore. And that's because they haven't been training that. So as you get into your 60s and 70s, you have to think about lower body functional strength, but also speed and power and things that are going to keep that spring in your step, right? So when Shawna and Alli show up to, the restaurant and you want to beat them for the last table in the restaurant, you have to have a spring in your step, right? If you want to catch a bus and you're like, oh, I got to run to the bus stop, can you still do that at 80 years old, right? So can you still play tennis? Can you still play a sport? You got to have a little bit of quickness to do those things. So I always tell people 10 to 15 minutes of lower body strength training will absolutely dramatically change your life in your later decades. And so you just got to get started. Don't overthink it. Don't get overwhelmed. You guys have tons of resources to help people with exercises and getting started. And don't think you have to join a gym. Though I'm biased since I've been in the personal training industry 20 years. I'm certainly biased. Getting an expert to help you design a program is going to keep you safer and allow you probably better results quicker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And even, you're mentioning about the jumping jacks and, even like there's that study that shows even 20 jumping jacks a day will build bone density.
Yep.
So,
absolutely.
I mean, you're doing a lot of benefit in terms of like the plyometrics and reactivity and power.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the reasons I like chair stands, power stands, jump squats, that's all the same movement, right? Jumping jacks, all of those things are going to build lower body density, bone density, and lower body muscle density. And so you've got to be doing stuff on your feet and weight bearing. And so that's so critical, especially as we age. Osteoporosis is not a normal part of aging. Unfortunately, it's a common part of aging for a lot of women, right? About 1 in 7 to 1 in 8 women are going to develop osteoporosis, and much higher if we bring in osteopenia. Then you do have real concerns with falls and, injuries and things of that nature. Because if you have osteoporosis, you fall in your driveway, you could break your hip. If I fall in my driveway today because I do something stupid, there's no way I'm going to break my hip because my bones are so dense, right? It would probably take a car accident for me to break my hip. But women already have less bone density than men. They're not as large as men. And then if they're not active, now
Yeah.
you're increasing your chances. So again, osteoporosis is not a normal, it's not, oh, to be 80 and a woman is to have osteoporosis. That's not true at all. My grandmother lived to 99 and 3/4, never
Wow.
registered on the osteopenia osteoporosis scale, right? So it's not something you have to get.
Yeah. Yeah. It's preventable. I mean, but because of, you know, that's a big part of our education in terms of like just in menopause, bone density, it drops unless you're
Yep.
doing something about it, especially for slighter women.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, there's a slight advantage, right? I don't know that it's a good advantage, but there's a slight advantage to women that are larger, right? In fact, some of the research is sort of odd, right? There's this whole you don't want to be obese, but if you happen to be slightly overweight in your 80s, it's protective. Well, why is that? It's like, well, because you have more mass, you have more bone density, you have more caloric reserve, you have so to be super thin in your 80s, probably not a necessary thing, right? So there's sort of this shifting curve. Yeah, in your 40s and 50s, you probably want to be at a healthy weight, but in your 70s and 80s, if you're 20 or 30 pounds overweight, probably actually protective.
Well, I think the thing that I'm noticing as an I call myself an aging athlete is that my training is more going towards more function as well. Like, sure, I want to do fun things, but I also want to age well. And so I've modified my training such that, I've had both hips replaced now. I want those hips to last the rest of my life. I want
Right.
to stay functional and mobile. And so, I've kind of backed off on some of the competitive, say CrossFit, because I don't like the programming that I don't feel like it's designed necessarily for healthy aging.
What you're talking
That's
about with CrossFit, I think, is a good question, Shauna, because I think people get to a certain age, and you're experiencing that, right? You get to a certain age and you're like, I don't know if this exercise actually serves my lifestyle that well. And there's what I call a risk reward ratio for exercises, right? And you're like, the risk of getting hurt from this exercise does not equal what it rewards me in life, right? It's not helping me hike and bike and,
yeah.
paddleboard and whatever it is you want to do, right? So you're like, why am I doing it, right? It,
Yeah, it
so
it was hard to kind of put a pin in that competitive aspect though, as and
sure,
I know that aging athletes would find that as well. Like I came to a healthy conclusion that hey, there's some skills that I'm gonna like I like handstand walking. There's not really a big risk, like the reward of me being able to do handstand walks in the retirement home is much better
right,
than or greater than the risk of like I can handle that. But like some of the programming that I was doing, it's like no, I think it's just meant to break me.
right,
So,
exactly, yeah.
so
And if there's, like when I train a downhill skier, um, we're going to have to do some activities that have some level of risk, but that those level of activities might be completely inappropriate for the next client who's like, hey, all I said I wanted to do was play tag with my grandkids, right? I didn't say I wanted to be doing box jumps and skiing moguls and stuff. Like, why are you having me do all this jumping stuff? Oh yeah, right. Wrong program, wrong client, right? The risk reward doesn't make sense anymore.
yeah, yeah,
I have clients that they don't want to do any kind of jumping that are in that older category, any kind of speed exercises. So I like what you talked about, Dan, on the flip side of that, which is, again, making it appropriate, making it safe, and incorporating those things that are going to help us to improve our life and our brain connections with our body, and those connections speaking to each other, and the body knowing what to do when the brain wants to move quickly. So
Yep.
doing those things, but then also, of course, the risk reward of some exercises. I'm not a big fan of box jumps. I mean, I know no thing if other people are, but I've even told my clients, I'm like, I just have seen too many people, I don't do them myself. For me, at my stage, it's just not something, risk reward. So I can definitely relate to that as we go through our own aging process, but also with our clients that.
Yep. Yep.
And how do you get them to, and just doing this podcast will be helpful, Dan. So thank you for speaking to that whole speed thing. How can we get ladies to understand the need to do those things safely? Because we're not talking about doing box jumps when we're talking about adding some balance, some speed, some agility. those things, how do we get ladies to understand that that's actually a good thing and not like, oh, I'm going to hurt myself, or I should, or that's not for me. I'm too old for that. Because I hear
Right.
that I'm too old for that.
Right. Yeah. Too old for that. Or there's a fear factor. I think part of it is going back to what their goals are. Right. So when people say, I want to be able to play with the grandkids, or I want to be able to take a hike, or I want to be able to travel, you start to use those things as, well, this is why you have to be able to do this. Right. Because, yeah, you don't have to be able to run a 100-meter dash anymore. But if you want to be able to play with your grandkids in the backyard, if it's wiffle ball or kickball or some of these things, you have to have enough speed and power to be able to move and do these things, right? And then some people will be like, well, but I don't want to do that with my grandkids. And then you sort of have to ask, well, if you take a trip or you travel, how much functional? I mean, if you go to Europe is not very ADA friendly, right? I mean, it's just not, especially if you're exploring castles and ruins, and if you go to Greece or Rome or any of these places where, you're walking on things that were built 2,000 years ago, and they're not designed for wheelchairs or walkers or canes. So you have to have a level of ability to move. Yeah, do you have to be the fastest person? No, but this is why we have to do some speed work, right? Because you have to be able to move well. Otherwise, you wind up sitting on the tour bus with all the old folks, right? And that usually is enough to motivate people to, okay, we'll do some of the speed work, right? It's also speed work is also about balance and recovery, right? So if you can move your feet fast, you're far more likely to recover if you lose your balance. Well, now, and this is where people are like, oh, but I'm too old. Well, you're not too old to fall and break your hip, right? Because if you're saying, oh, I'm too old, well, then if you're 75, you're not too old to possibly fall. So you got to be quick enough. If you lose your balance or get knocked off balance, if somebody runs into you in the grocery store, right? Are you going to be able to quick enough to recover? Or are you going to wind up falling down and getting seriously hurt because somebody wasn't watching their 7-year-old run through the grocery store, right? Or whatever it happens to be, right? This is why people stop going to athletic events, because they're like, oh my gosh, if there's going to be 50,000 people at the football game, what if somebody bumps into me and knocks me over?
Yeah.
You don't think that way in your 40s and 50s, right? Well, now you're thinking that way because you're not fast enough to recover or respond to that stimulus, right? So this is why I tell people we got to train speed, agility, quickness, your ability to move and control your body. All those things are so important.
I think just creating the awareness, and obviously, the best time to plant an oak tree is yesterday, kind of like with building strength, agility, and balance.
Yep.
Anybody that's younger, like, we've got to start working on that as we're young, because I really like Dr. Peter Attia's reference to healthy aging. Like, if you want to travel, people say, hey, I want to travel when I retire, but you can't lift up 20 pounds over your head
Right.
now. Like, even with, like, there's going to be some age related decline. You're going to have to lift 40 pounds now to be able to lift the 20-pound bag into the overhead compartment when you're old enough, like when you're retired and able to travel. So building that as we go.
Oh,
But
absolutely. Absolutely. That physiologic reserve is so critical, which is another reason to challenge people, whatever age they're at, right? I mean, like, it blows my mind, Shawna, that you're in your 60s, right? But the reality is you're not going to be as strong at 80 as you are today. You're
no,
not.
no,
But the question is, will you still be the strongest 80-year-old female in the room, right? Like, there's a good chance for that because you have built so much strength in your 40s, 50s, and now 60s. And if you continue to do that, you're going to wake up at 80 and go, well, but I'm still the strongest 80-year-old woman in the room. So you're ahead of the curve, right? And you're not going to be like, oh, I can't travel because I can't put a carry-on up overhead. You're going to be like, give me your carry-on, I'll throw it up there, right? So we can change those things. I mean, I had an 88-year-old client come to me, and he was saying, I don't think I'm going to be able to go see my grandchildren graduate from high school. I became an older grandfather at the age of 70, and I just don't think I can travel anymore, right? I mean, he was 88 and he was feeling every bit of 88. And he's like, traveling in airports exhausting. I can't handle the luggage. And basically was resigned to the fact that, well, I'm 88. What more can I said, well, Don, are you willing to train hard? I mean, about 3 months later, we had him on the floor. We had him doing battle ropes. He's throwing medicine balls around. He's like, you've completely changed my outlook for my 90s. Not only have I seen my first two grandkids graduate high school. I know I'm going to see the next two. And I mean, I'm Facebook friends with a 94-year-old, right? I mean, he's fit, healthy, strong, traveling to Seattle from Indianapolis, no longer a concern for his, right? We changed his outlook on that. So that is really critical. So anyone listening today right now, everything you do in your 50s, you're going to benefit from that in your 70s, right? Everything you're doing in your 70s, you're going to benefit from that in your 90s. So it doesn't mean you have to be the strongest person in the room like Shawna, right? But it sure helps to be the strongest version of you that you possibly can be, because you're going to benefit from that down the road.
Well, I also like the message that it's never too late, that 88-year-old thought it was too late, and you still turned it around for him.
Absolutely. We turned it. I couldn't even believe it, right? 6 months later, I'd come out and he's like down on all four doing bear crawls. He's slamming battle ropes and throwing medicine balls, and you're like, and you sort of do a double take, because you're like, wait, Don's 88, right? But he's moving like he's 62, right? So you can absolutely change it. It's very modifiable. But again, the takeaway isn't listening here to be like, oh, well, I can wait till I'm 88 like Don. No,
Yeah.
Don would have been a lot better off if he'd started at 68 or 58.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have clients, I see so many ladies that can't get up and down off the floor, that are too young to not be able to get up and down off of the floor. And so I love that message of don't wait, like now, seize the moment, don't wait and put it off, because that really does affect everything when you can't do simple things. And if you fall and you can't get up and down off the floor, how are you going to get help? How are you going to get, things that just,
Oh, yeah.
I actually fell in a training session last night. Thankfully I didn't break anything, but some people, it just doesn't take much. And it's sad that so many of us are missing out and we don't even realize it.
Dan, I have one question that I wanted to address before we kind of wrap up. And that is, why is it important for coaches to understand functional aging, and when taking clients on and learning about how to coach people effectively?
Yeah, that's a great question. And obviously that's my kind of passion here the last 10 years. I think it's really helpful if a coach has a functional aging training model in mind when they're training someone. And I actually say it goes as young as about 40, but a lot of our functional aging training model comes from my history in athletics. At the end of the day, humans want to perform, right? And so a 75-year-old might say, well, but I don't really want to do that much. But there's still a level of athletic performance you want, right? The most athletic thing you might do is carry the laundry up and down stairs, right? But that is a task you have to do, right? Climbing stairs is a physical task. You got to be able to perform that. So what sort of functional performance do you want? And then let's break that down. And then when we think about how's a 35-year-old physiologically different than a 75-year-old, than a 55-year-old, than an 85-year-old, and how many joint issues do they have? And we realize most people over 60 have some level of arthritis somewhere. Well, what's the best thing for arthritis? Movement. But we also got to be smart about it, right? We can't train a 60-year-old like they're 15 and expect them to respond and recover, right? The 60-year-old is going to be like, hey, I need a day off. Give me a day off every once in a while. I can't train 2 hours a day, 5 days a week like an 18-year-old. So we have to start being a little smarter about how we rotate our exercises and balance things, and just approach it with the aging client in mind. The other big thing I think is that a 60 and 70-year-old has very, very different fitness goals than a 20 and 30-year-old. In fact, in a lot of cases, it's less about aesthetics and weight loss, and it's more about function and movement and quality of life. And I want to be able to do things. And I mean, one of my favorite fitness goals is I want to live in my own home till I die, right? I do not want to have to move into a nursing home, right? And I don't want to have a conversation at Christmas this year with my kids about, Mom, maybe it's time you think about. If that conversation comes up, and guess what? Those conversations don't come up if you're fit, strong, vibrant, functional, independent, right? They don't come up until you start to show signs of struggling a little bit, not quite as strong as you need to be, can't quite go upstairs without help, right? So that's one of the fitness goals I love, right? Because for most of us, we don't aspire to spend our final days in a nursing home, right? Now, Some
Yeah.
of us might aspire to spend our days in a really high-end retirement community that's like amazing, but that's a different experience.
I am FAI certified. And so, to any of our listeners, like if you are a coach, I would highly recommend any of the FAI education courses. So, we'll have some links in the show notes of where to reach out to you, Dan. And if you are, not a coach, but looking for a coach, consider, asking if your coach is FAI certified or what experience they have with working with older people, because it is kind of an apples and oranges type thing. Dan, what would be your wish for our listeners?
Well, my wish, I think, would be I try to instill this thought that none of us really know what opportunity or calling is coming our way decades from now, right? Like, I don't know what opportunity or calling is going to come to me in my 80s, but I better be physically prepared for it. And I always share the story of my grandma went to Pakistan to teach English as a second language to Afghan refugee women at age 80. Well, she couldn't have done that if she wasn't robust, physically strong, fit, energetic. I mean, literally, she was a little fireball, right? She's a 4'10" woman, and she'll run you over in the marketplace, right? So I share that, and my grandmother was not a champion of fitness, but she was a champion of physical activity, right? She probably walked miles a day when she lived in different cities and was very active and played sports with me in her 60s, and it reminds me that I think a lot of times we take for granted and we think, oh, well, when I'm 80 or 90, I'm, going to slow down and take it easy. And I say, I don't think that's really the right way to think about life. I don't know what could be coming your way in your 80s or 90s, but are you physically ready? And if right now the thought of that sounds daunting to you, then you probably need to get more serious about your physicality, your fitness, your overall well-being, because the reality is opportunities are going to come to you in your 80s, and you're either going to be ready or you're not.
Love it. So my wish for people is that they will listen to what Dan has said and take it to heart, because Dan, you just gave us so many pearls of wisdom. So I'm so excited for people to hear this, and that's my wish. Listen to what Dan said, y'all, and do something with it. Thanks for listening. You'll find me, Alli, on Instagram at Alli Kerr Fitness.
And you'll find me, Shawna, on Instagram at Shawna Kaminski. Feel free to pop us a DM with questions and or feedback.
Until next time, be healthy and be happy.